Okay, we'll get started. In the next two panels, I think you'll get some real value out of hearing from people that know what they're talking about. I think the one thing I can celebrate in my career, and certainly being here at the University of Houston, is I get a chance to be around really smart people all the time. And that makes work not only fun and pleasurable, but also insightful. This first panel that I'll be introducing you to, before we get into the actual panel discussions, I'm going to give you an overview of a project that's going on and is in development and moving forward with the ADM site in Decatur, Illinois. Now, we're all excited about everything going on in Houston and the Gulf Coast, et cetera, but I think it's all important for us all to recognize that the world of CCUS is moving in a lot of different directions, in a lot of different places. And again, I think, as I mentioned earlier, in terms of companies and strategies and things of that nature to drive investment and to drive the effort, we've got a great example of that here. Let me quickly go down the list of panelists. I won't give you bios and everything. I'll let them say a few words as we start into our discussion. But Matt Murphy on the end with Max Strategies, all the way from Illinois. Glad to have you here. Fred Eames from Hunton, Andrews and Kurth. Again, one of our founding members of our Center for Carbon Management. He's a partner in the organization. He's here from Washington, and he's here to help us. Right? So we're delighted to have a guy from Washington, right? Yeah, okay. But no, he's a longtime colleague, and you talk about somebody that knows the industry and knows CCUS. It's been my pleasure to work with him for 25 years. Colin Graves is the EVP at ADM, also come down from Illinois. Appreciate you making the trip, and certainly your representation and willingness to be a part of this conversation, really critical, and we can't thank you enough. And my personal friend and colleague, who I've been working with now for the last 3-4 years, John Wiens. John is a member, or actually the CEO, of Warwick Carbon Solutions. Warwick is also a part of our Center for Carbon Management here at the University of Houston. And maybe as important as anything, if any of you have had the opportunity to sample our CCUS Executive Education course, which is an online offering, John is one of our subject matter experts in terms of the faculty that we utilized for that program, all of which come from the industry, except for myself and Dr. Krishnamurti. But each of those modules directed and presented in that program. If you haven't had a chance to see and understand a little bit more about it, please look at the website for that. John is really choreographing the project there at the site. I'm going to give the podium over to John to give a little overview of what this project concept is up at Decatur. And thanks for making the time, John. Appreciate it.
Chuck, thank you for having me today. It's a pleasure to be up here to be able to talk about my company and our partners and our project, Project Broadwing Energy. As Chuck said, I'm the CEO of Warwick Carbon Solutions. Warwick is a developer of carbon capture projects in the industrial and power space, pursuing projects across the country. And our first project, which we're here to talk about today, is Broadwing Energy, which is a project in collaboration and partnership with ADM at their flagship facility in Decatur, Illinois. It's really a transformative project, in our opinion, for carbon capture, as it's demonstrating capture at scale and disposing of 50 million tons of CO2 over the course of its first 20 years of operations. The project really wouldn't be possible if it wasn't for the leadership of ADM in CCUS and being the early mover that they were. What you see here on the screen is back 15 years ago when ADM started working on building out some of those early pilots for sequestration. So in 2009, this first well was drilled. This was for a large-scale pilot for CO2 injection. The well's still operating in Decatur, and part of our program. There was a second well drilled, and so there's currently 2 operating wells there. First injection of CO2 occurred in 2011, and so this site is where our plant is located, inside the ADM facility, and we're utilizing their existing infrastructure, and they're going to expand it. But it's a nice, convenient spot for it, and it's the only spot in the country because it's the only 2 sequestration wells in the country that are operating. And obviously there's going to be growth involved. But this well and the field of wells here is what is enabled our project and really cemented ADM as kind of the leader in the United States for sequestration, and we're very grateful to have them as a partner. Whenever you go to Decatur, if you ever have, I'm sure many of you haven't, it's a massive facility. It's ADM's largest operation with 4,000 employees working there every day, and you'll see the breadth of the operation with the soy crushing operation, corn operation, all the vehicles, trains, 4,000 people moving, and you see energy at work really, and you also see the responsibility of that energy and how it has to be reliable and how it has to be able to deliver. And the current ADM fleet of cogeneration runs on coal. About 4 years ago, Colin and I started working on, Colin's on the stage here from ADM, we started working on different ideas and options for how we can develop a carbon capture project to move to a cleaner energy product for steam and power. And we looked at many different technologies, pre-combustion, post-combustion, and many different companies. It's a very competitive landscape as many people are working in this space. And we ended up selecting Mitsubishi Power for their advanced class turbines and Mitsubishi Heavy Industries for their post-amine capture. And really we thought that they were best in class and can deliver one product that we're extremely excited about. And from there, really the hard work started, and that was one of which was designing a plant that worked from an economic perspective and also from an operational and product perspective. So we spent a lot of time iterating on which turbine we're going to use, whether we're going to have single trains, double trains, how much duct firing we're going to do. So all the engineering that was led by our team in collaboration with the great team from Mitsubishi who's represented here today, and also we brought in Kiewit to be our feed contractor and EPC. So the plant we ultimately selected, you can see here on the screen, is the Mitsubishi product as mentioned, and the net output of the plant is 350 megawatts, 1.5 million pounds of steam an hour, and ADM is disposing into their field 2.5 million tons of CO2 a year. And to be clear, Warwick owns this project, we're developing it, and ADM is our off-taker for energy and for CO2. And when we spent a lot of time with Matt and team at ADM going around the state of Illinois and advocating for CCUS and advocating for legislation. And when we do that, we often bring up this kind of, and it was mentioned earlier, and it always is about clusters and how things occur around good products, and they need to occur like that. But we mostly do that in terms of CCUS infrastructure. But in this case, we're creating a product that's green steam and green power. That's 24/7 baseload, and we describe it as though it's kind of like a tree. And the beginning of that tree was ADM's efforts to decarbonize ethanol, which created a lower CI footprint ethanol product, which has attracted companies to Decatur. I'll let Colin talk about that when we get up there. But it's attracted companies, and the base of that tree is increased because now we're going to be providing product that we can provide to those smaller or those companies that are building around ADM, and they're coming to the area because they want low carbon energy and they want low carbon products and feed streams from ADM. And so the roots are these companies that are coming down, and I'll let Colin mention the names of them, but very big names, international companies making investments directly in Decatur, some of which are already under construction. I am tremendously bullish on carbon capture in the power and industrial space. I don't think it's an easy thing to do. It's been a lot of hard work on our part. We're looking around the country under our joint development agreement with Mitsubishi Power at various options. But in the power space, it's rapidly changing, and we have a couple different trends at one time. The abandonment of coal for baseload power is decreasing the 24/7 baseload that we need as a resource in this country, and then the build out of renewables is only a partial solution. And there's a great demand from power consumers, which a piece of our plant is going onto the grid through a MISO interconnection. And there's a great demand for clean, reliable power. And as you look at future pricing across the country, which we do every day, because of the trends that we're seeing and the growth of data centers and AI build out in that future demand load that's coming, pricing is going to take off, and the consumers are going to see that, and it creates, I think, a perfect strike zone for the expansion of carbon capture and natural gas generation. The other big element of I think what we're going to see in space, and it was mentioned by Chuck, is that for carbon capture to occur, particularly post-amine, steam is extremely important. And steam is extremely important for nearly every industrial process. And so to decarbonize steam, there are not a lot of great options outside of natural gas. Your options is electric conversion, and let you run your own numbers, but it's wildly uneconomic and hasn't been demonstrated at scale. There's coal, and I don't think we're except for capturing off coal, I don't think we're moving to a new coal generation for steam. And then there's natural gas. And so as you look at facilities around the country, I think we're going to see the need for steam coming from natural gas and post-combustion capture. What we're doing at Warwick, and I'm sure what many of you are doing in the room is certainly not easy. There's a lot of naysayers of carbon capture, but I think the market is extremely efficient. And I think if you bring products forward that satisfy the initiatives of companies to decarbonize, and your own initiatives for your company, I think you can push things forward. And we're going to have to swing the bat to get some of these things done. So I urge you to swing the bat. And we've done that here with ADM as our partner, and I'm excited to share the panel and talk about it here.
John, thanks. That's a great overview and really sets us up for our conversation here. I have to say it's been a pleasure to have Warwick become part of our Center for Carbon Management here at the university, also part of our CCUS consortium, sponsored by the DOE, and I think just getting out in the marketplace and having people hear about this is pretty exciting. Colin, why don't we start with you? It's obviously a big strategic decision. I'm sure a lot of considerations, but at the heart of it, what really were the main drivers around the need for this and the inspiration for a project like this?
Sure. As Chuck said, I'm Colin Graves. I'm Vice President of Innovation at ADM, and one of my primary responsibilities is decarbonization and working on different ways that we can decarbonize our operations. As Jonathan said, we're big thermal users, so we're big steam users, and that was one of the driving factors behind making a switch. Now there's a little bit of a sustainability approach to this in terms of ADM continuing to drive our towards our sustainability goals. We have Strive 35 goals in terms of reducing our emissions by 2035, but we also had another, I'll say, stick in this, in that in Illinois passed legislation that we needed to be off of coal by 2030. So there was a little bit of a carrot and a stick as part of this entire decision-making process. But really, that was the focus behind it. We looked at everything when we went through this process. We looked at everything from natural gas to nuclear, trying to decide what was the best path. And as Jonathan mentioned, we looked at, there's solar, and Chuck, you mentioned earlier, solar, wind. Those were all options that we considered, but again, we had this steam need, and we couldn't solve that problem with those efficiently. So that's when we came back, and Jonathan and his team was very good about working with us on determining what the best course was for a technology to use. And we were able to, again, capitalize on our carbon capture ability and storage ability in Decatur. We sit on top of the Mount Simon Formation. It's a great structure for sequestration. So that was primarily, Chuck, the driver is going that direction for both sustainability and then legislation changes that required us to make that move.
Appreciate that, Colin. And maybe this is a good time to point the finger at Matt down there at the end with Mac Strategies. Matt, you think about that Illinois legislation. You think about the landscape of business trying to promote investment and bringing jobs to Illinois, and at the same time having a very strong environmental feeling, I guess, in Illinois. Can you reflect on that a little bit for us here?
Sure, yeah, and Chuck, thank you for having me. First of all, this is a fantastic opportunity, a fantastic group, and it's a pleasure to be a part of it. Matt Murphy, contract lobbyist for Warwick in Illinois, and I lobby with a group called Mac Strategies Group, a public relations and lobbying firm there. Prior to that, I spent about a decade in the Illinois Senate. And so I have sort of that background of what I now live with in terms of trying to educate. And it's a significant educational effort, and lobbying in general is often that. But on this subject, there's a lot that Illinois policymakers need to understand. That law was passed and signed by Governor J.B. Pritzker September 2021, and it does really, it's very aspirational. And I look at what you referred in your remarks, Chuck, to the Mount Simon sandstone. And to me, if Willy Wonka were giving out energy golden tickets, that's one of them. And part of our challenge in Illinois is making sure that policymakers understand you've been given a geological lottery ticket here, and what do you need to do to fully maximize it. And so, Governor Pritzker is very proud of his environmental record. He's very concerned about climate change, carbon. This law that was passed requires 100% carbon-free by 2045. He is also extremely interested in, as is the legislature, economic development and bringing major companies, big-name companies with a lot of jobs to Illinois. One of the things we're trying to really drive home is that he has a really unique opportunity because of that geological lottery ticket and that pressure you alluded to before on major corporations from their boards to reduce their carbon intensity. There is, in projects like this, and as Colin alluded to, ADM is going to use a substantial portion of what Warwick will put in Decatur, but they're not going to use all of it. Other major companies are clamoring and coming to get the rest of it. Why? Because they have to report a reduced carbon intensity. This is replicable up and down the spine of Illinois through central and southern Illinois because of that Mount Simon sandstone. And it gives the governor and the legislature an opportunity to attract major corporations, major job producers to Illinois because of their environmental policy, because of their energy policy. And he's a very proud Democrat. He has sparred with Republican governors over the years. And, to us, part of this is you can go to other states where, and maybe take some of their jobs, their major corporations, and lure them here because of the opportunity for them to say to their boards, their investors, look at the reduction of our carbon footprint by coming to Illinois and taking advantage of CCUS over the Mount Simon sandstone. It's an educational challenge, Because, you know, when you're a legislator, you know 1,000 subjects an inch deep, and that's just the nature of it. So it's incumbent upon those of us, those of you with an expertise to educate those policymakers. We've been going up and across Illinois trying to do that. We've had wonderful meetings so far. There has been a lot of receptivity to what we're talking about. But it's an education, and we're going to continue that because this has the potential in Illinois. I mean, you talk about the potential to be a major exporter and a fundamental change on how energy is produced in the Midwest. If Illinois gets this right and absolutely 100% completely effectively utilizes that geological lottery ticket, you could see a completely different central and southern Illinois 15, 20 years from now.
Thanks, Matt. You know, and we think about it in a similar light here in Texas, although it may have different drivers around it. We've got a lot of industries here that have made those similar kinds of pledges. I want to reflect a little bit on what you just mentioned and throw this to my good friend Fred Ames here, who I've known for many, many years, involved with a lot of issues, not the least of which recently is our policy and governmental relations effort within our CCUS consortia. Fred leads that subcommittee, and we've identified it over and over again how important education is in the general communities that we're working, not just on the Hill in Washington, but at the local level. So reflect on that for just a moment, and then also maybe as a second part to my question to you, you've been involved with power markets all your life and seen the opportunity to move power into markets. We've got this new offering called carbon-free baseload power. Pretty exciting, right? So how do you view the landscape of that, not just for this project, but maybe generally across the country in terms of importance?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Chuck. First, thanks for the opportunity to be here. Hunton Andrews Kurth is really pleased to be associated with the Center for Carbon Management and Energy here at the University of Houston and to support the work that Chuck does. It's really just been a tremendous vehicle for a lot of really great work. So thanks for that, Chuck. So starting with the point on education, Chuck and I were just out in Midland for the last few days at the annual CO2 Enhanced Oil Recovery Conference that takes place out there every December. Has been going on for about 30 years. And this is a point that I emphasized, and I know you did as well, that the work that companies are doing to reduce the emissions from carbon-producing industries is vital, and the public needs to know about it. We are not going to power the world with windmills and solar panels. It's not going to happen. They are an important part of what we're going to do for the future, but I'll give you a great statistic, all right? We have about 7.9 billion people on the planet now. 30 years from now, we're going to have about 2 billion more people, but we will have 3 billion more people living in cities because particularly China and India will move people out of the agrarian areas and into cities. So when you do the math on that, that's like adding a New York City to the planet every month over the next 30 years. And it's not going to stop at the end of 30 years. That's just that's the rate of growth that we're going to see on the planet. So we need energy for all the people we have now, plus another 350 New York cities, okay? So this kind of work that Warwick and ADM are doing here with the capture and the storage is absolutely vital. The public needs to know about that. We see a tremendous amount of misinformation that is out in the public. If you Google carbon capture facts, the first thing that pops up is an organization out of Washington State where they give you a lot of non-facts from people who don't know what they're talking about. And so Chuck mentioned the Smart Carbon Network. that's a vital enterprise that needs to take place. But anyway, back to the power sector. What Warwick is doing here is exactly the thing that we have been waiting to happen for about 15 years. I first got involved in CCUS about 15 years ago from the power sector side, thinking that cap and trade legislation coming from Washington was going to be enacted and that utilities were going to have to capture their carbon emissions. And somebody said, well, what happens when a utility has an obligation to serve customers? They're not going to be able to put CO2 into the atmosphere. What happens if something goes wrong with the storage reservoir and they're also not able to put the CO2 in the ground? How do we manage that risk? So that's how we initially got involved in this. A lot of companies at that time started working on projects. I worked for a number of years on one in Mississippi that got constructed. The technology worked. It just turned out that because of other innovations in energy, particularly the great shale revolution and the production of natural gas very cheaply in the United States, that project no longer became economic. So unfortunately, they scrapped it. So this is really a groundbreaking development that we've been waiting for a long time. One other thing about this, Chuck. Historically, in energy regulation and electricity regulation, you've had two factors that matter: affordable and reliable. All the state commissions that regulate electricity service in the country are tasked with producing just and reasonable rates for electricity. Over the last 20 to 30 years, there's been a real move both at the state level and at the federal level to incorporate a third element into this, which is environmental performance. Now, power plants have always had to worry about their environmental performance, right? I mean, there are Clean Air Act regulations, there's water discharge, waste discharge, all those sorts of regulations. So you're not going to be able to operate your power plant without complying with those things. But the order of dispatching those power plants into the market has never been a matter of environmental performance until the last 20 or 30 years. And that's because of two main mechanisms: subsidies in the form of the Section 45 production tax credit in particular, and then also mandatory purchase requirements in the form of state renewable portfolio standards. Now, it may come as news to you that there are already 5 states that say within our renewable portfolio standard requirement, we're going to allow CCUS into that. And Massachusetts came up here. I don't have any affinity or affiliation with Massachusetts, but it'll surprise you to know that they're one of the states that would allow CCUS to qualify under their state standard. But that's the kind of thing that ought to happen to encourage exactly the kind of thing that you guys are doing elsewhere in the country.
Yeah, I guess a future that's sort of getting ready to evolve, right? I mean, we've been waiting for it, and here it comes. I think the next question I'd like to throw would be a combination between you, John, and you, Colin, in terms of the integration at the site. I mean, you've got a big project that you're executing. You've got a lot of workers, but I'm sure there's an interconnectivity between your site and the site, and the ability to integrate all of that. I know it was on your chart there. I see you looking for a second, but just reflect a little bit on how that working relation works from the standpoint of executing a project and then operating it, and then in terms of being a customer and having the confidence, I guess, of the delivery of those most essential projects and products, right? And I'm reflecting as an industrial gas guy, because we used to deal with this all the time, somebody buying something over the fence. So I'd be interested in just your reflections on that, John, and then we can ask Colin.
Sure. Well, I mean, it's underway now. So, you know, we have an operating team led by Paul McDonough, who's here in the crowd, and Kyle Braun. And on a daily basis, we're working on, you know, the various plumbing for the plant, whether that be water, wastewater disposal, and our interconnection to the MISO grid. And then we interface with ADM on a near daily basis for coordination of that, because it's a ever-changing landscape, as I'm sure anybody knows, as you're under full-scale development in a plant. And ADM has a really great team of experts in all those categories, and as former EPC experience to water to power, all of it, they have experts across the board, a real robust team that we interface with and work out all those details. But like the graphic that was up on the screen showed, it did highlight where we are, but we're directly across the road from power substation, which is where we interconnect to, and then steam runs into the heart of the ADM plant, and so all those bits and pieces we're coordinating in terms of the design of each piece of that.
So Chuck, that's an interesting question, because traditionally ADM has been a company that we've done everything ourselves. So we have our own cogeneration facilities to power our plants. It's always been an inside the fence type of operation. So to your question, there was a lot of trust that went into it, a lot of developing that relationship to make sure that we're not going to get ourselves into a situation that's going to shut our plant down. So we had a lot of conversations about redundancy, what things we could do, what things we couldn't do. Same with on the carbon capture and storage side of it, in terms of we're handling the storage for Warwick in this particular situation. So we wanted to make sure that we could provide them with the same level of redundancy and the same level of give them the comfort that we're not going to create a problem for their plant. So it's been a good relationship in terms of working through this. And I can't say that we didn't have our arm wrestling and over certain things, but we worked through it. And I think at the end of the day, I think we're both going to benefit from this. And I think on both sides, we're both very positive about the outcome.
Well, I mean, you're still talking with each other and seem to be pretty friendly backstage, so I guess we're doing good things. Matt, let me ask you a question about, this is a pretty unique project, right? We've got the fence line, we've got the Class 6 wells, a lot of expertise ADM's developed over the last 15 years through the DOE demonstration projects, et cetera. So you mentioned about other places in Illinois and the Mount Simon and this and that and the other thing. So as you get out of that maybe almost perfect environment, what are some of the headwinds that you hear about in the world that you're working in Illinois in terms of additional projects like this? Because there certainly should be an appetite for them, but what are those headwinds?
Well, one of the headwinds is there is among policymakers, among an influential subset of policymakers in Illinois, I think an ongoing concern about carbon capture as a technology. There is not anywhere near a universal acceptance among Illinois lawmakers that this is the right approach, or as you said in your introduction, absolutely necessary to power Illinois for generations to come. They haven't all accepted that at this point. So that's a significant issue. There are wells, it's all been worked out in Decatur where and how the sequestration will occur, and the pore space that it'll go into. As you move into other areas, those may be issues that aren't as well laid out on the front end, but would need to be. Transmission is certainly going to be an issue. The good news is there are a lot of locations, generation locations going offline in the recent past and coming in the near years to come, where a project like this could be located where there are already transmission lines to the grid. But transmission beyond those types of building locations could be an issue. So those are some of the big things. But it's the broader, I think, acceptance. And again, look, the Biden administration has acknowledged that CCUS has to be a part of this. We need that sort of acceptance of that and trust in this technology in Illinois as well. And then one really significant component, I had alluded before, you brought up the legislation that was passed in 2021, the Clean Energy Jobs Act, CEJA, again, requires 100% carbon-free by 2045. So this project that Warwick is undertaking in Decatur at ADM, you know, privately funded, substantial investment. You know, obviously, as you all know, you've got to make a return on an investment, and there has to be an adequate opportunity to do that. 100% carbon-free at 2045. 2045 is an eternity from now, and the younger you are, the further out it is. But in energy terms, it's not that far away at all. And again, that's a very aspirational date that was put into that bill. I think a lot of people, including a lot of lawmakers who voted for it, expect there to be changes along the way. But it has the potential to chill investment and deter people from taking advantage of that geological lottery ticket throughout the rest of Illinois, because it will limit their ability to collect over time and get that investment back. And it's something that the legislature is going to have to consider. I mean, just one example, I mean, at ADM, with the amount of steam power ADM needs and the utter inability of them to be able to get it through anything really other than coal or this project in the near term, they would have to seriously consider moving those 4,000 jobs out of Illinois because that isn't them, you know, holding their breath till they turn blue or taking their ball and going home. They couldn't make it pencil out without that change. And so there's got to be a little bit of flexibility. And if it starts on, you know, narrower campuses like high energy users like ADM, that may be a good place to start.
Well, let me jump on a comment that you made, and I'm going to throw this to Fred. And it's difficult to generalize the attitudes in Washington, D.C. I could speak to that from a while ago. You're living it every day. The Biden administration's support of CCUS. What's your reaction to that across the board? I mean, there's a lot of reactions in D.C. these days, sort of one end of the spectrum to the other. What's your sense of it, Fred?
Like, is that a true statement? Is that what you're asking me, the Biden administration support?
You can make it as provocative as you want, Fred.
Well, we just came from a meeting where there were representatives of the U.S. Department of Energy there, and those folks who were there, and there are many others in DOE and other pockets within the government who are strong supporters of CCUS. There's no question about it. And I very intentionally use the the acronym CCUS, not only because Chuck is here and he would whack me over the head if I didn't put that U in there, because Chuck is literally the guy who put the U in CCUS. But we don't need to go into that. But in any event, the point is that they support both carbon capture and storage and carbon capture and utilization of the carbon for enhanced oil recovery, for example. Okay, there are people who do that. There are also people within the administration who want absolutely nothing to do with this. We have John Kerry over at the COP meetings just this week saying we need to eliminate fossil fuels, fossil fuel subsidies have to go. Okay, well, I don't know precisely what constitutes a fossil fuel subsidy in his book. Does the Section 45Q tax credit, for example, which has spurred a tremendous amount of growth in interest and developments with respect to CCUS, count as a fossil fuel subsidy? Because if it does, getting rid of that would be foolish if your goal is to reduce carbon emissions. So there's, and there are still pockets, Chuck, I would say this, set aside the administration. Up on Capitol Hill, if you went back 10 or 15 years ago, you had people on the right who said, CCS, why are you coming and talking to me about this? climate change isn't a real thing, I don't need to worry about this, okay? And even if it is a real thing, my constituents don't want to hear about it. And then you go to some offices on the left and they say, don't talk to me about CCUS because we're not going to need fossil fuels 20 years from now, okay, or whenever. So the numbers of folks on those fringes has decreased in Washington, D.C., but they're still there to some degree. You don't have to fight through the ones on the right quite as much anymore. They really seem to have diminished, but there is still a fairly vocal pocket of the ones on the left who say, we're going to power the planet without fossil fuels and without carbon emissions. And that's just not reality, so we still have to work through that.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Colin, you had mentioned earlier in terms of, your strategy, not just at Decatur, but even beyond Decatur in terms of your organization and your strategies. And then that's going to play onto a follow-on question I'm going to ask John about sort of the landscape of the marketplace. But specific to ADM, where do you see this project? Is it a learning opportunity, or is it one of what you think will be many?
Well, I think a couple things. First of all, when we went down this path, again, it was about we had to make a move. We had to move off of coal by 2030. This is an opportunity. Can we leverage our CCS capabilities? At the same time, we've seen a lot of inbounds from customers asking for low carbon products, whether it's low carbon ethanol for the fuel industry, whether it's low carbon dextrose to make other types of bio-based products. And we continue to have those inbounds. And Jonathan mentioned earlier in his presentation that we've been working with some companies. We announced a joint venture last year with LG Chem to produce polylactic acid, which is a renewable plastic plant in Decatur, Illinois. We've been working with a company for the last several years with the understanding that we would work towards decarbonization, and that's a company called Innova Feed, which is a European company that's going to make an insect protein. And those inquiries just keep coming in. We get probably an inquiry a week on that. And so that's when we think about what that created the opportunities there in Decatur for, we look at our other plants and say there's similar opportunities at our other plants that we can leverage if we do the same thing. So we have at ADM, we have the four main corn processing complexes in the United States, and each of those is on coal, as a coal-fired cogen. And so obviously we're looking at what that opportunity is to convert those over and then leverage that capability to offer low-carbon products out of those facilities as well. Because we don't see this as putting the genie back in the bottle. It's something that we think is here to stay, and we think the opportunity is going to be great, whether it's ethanol for sustainable aviation fuel, whether it's, again, dextrose into other fermentable products. We think that the runway's long here.
And with that long runway, even at ADM, but John, you're probably seeing a demand kind of evolving in the marketplace across the country. How does Warwick view, a lot of curiosity. It must be challenging to find the time and the effort for the individuals that are out there asking for your attention. How do you sort through that in terms of your own company's capabilities and your own attention to things?
Yeah, absolutely. There is a lot of interest. There's a lot of inbounds as well for us to look at partnering not only in the power space but also in the industrial, kind of hard to abate sectors. We've dove into some of those projects, are actively involved in the cement space, mainly because we want to push forward, in some of those really hard sectors, push forward projects because it needs to be done. It's hard work to do. We don't always have the right answer out of the gate, but it's necessary, and with our desire to make impact, have impactful investments to push those things forward. In the power space, and I say power and steam because the turbines that we're looking at can do both options, right? Whether we have a steam turbine or not. In the power and steam space, it's the intersection of infrastructure where this is an opportunity in the near term, because the sequestration build-out is going to take time. And so, you know, you have to flex that with your COD date timing and what is the current state of development of some of those Class 6 programs. So, you know, the addressable market is huge, but it's also, in the near term, has to be narrowed, and it has to be realistic to what you think you can execute on. And then, you know, your counterparty risk and your partners are probably the most important thing here. We've got a great relationship with ADM, and they're just a great counterparty to deal with. And, you know, whether you're going to execute something that's a first of a kind, second of a kind, or, you know, you're 10 or beyond, doesn't matter. All these projects are huge. You know, in order to qualify for 45Q, you have to have 75% capture or greater. So if you're looking at an emitter that is, you know, 1 million tons or greater, if that's a greenfield project, or, you know, a repurposing of a plant with capture, and you convert those volumes to, you know, MCF a day for those in the oil and gas industries, it's a big number. It's tremendous volumes of gas or fluid, depending on the state that you're moving it. And so, you know, your partner who's going to handle your Class 6 well has to be able to deliver, and it has to be able to deliver on time, and you have to be able to finance that, right? So we're looking at executing projects that we can do now, and we can finance, and we can put them together. And, you know, you just have to take that list of ideas and put them through the funnel of, you know, my engineering team and my financial team to make sure it makes sense.
Yeah, and just to follow on with what you just said about the Class 6 wells and the need for that. Fred, you said something out of Midland earlier this week about 161 pending Class 6 well applications at EPA.
I don't know the exact number as we sit here today, but it's well over 150 permit applications pending with the EPA for what's known as, many in the audience know the underground injection control program is the program through which you have to get approval to inject things into the subsurface in the United States. There's a number of different well classifications. Back in 2010, EPA promulgated a new program specifically for storing carbon dioxide called the Class 6 program. The whole regulatory purpose behind this program is to prevent endangerment of underground sources of drinking water. So there's a lot of work you have to do in order to get a Class 6 permit. You have to make sure that you're you know, not going to do anything to contaminate drinking water, that the CO2 is going to stay put. You have to do a lot of modeling up front, monitoring throughout the course of the program. And then you got to be there for 50 years as a default after you're done injecting. Okay, so it's a very, very rigorous program. EPA, if you look back about 2 years ago, there were maybe 20 applications pending. Now we have well over 150. In the course of the program, since 2010, EPA has issued permits for only 2 projects. One is ADM's, and the other is the Future Gen project, which never got built. So the only project that EPA has ever issued a Class 6 permit for that is in operation is ADM's. And fortunately, it's gone tremendously well. We were talking about the injectivity at the program, at the facility beforehand. It's as good as it gets, right? But all these people across the country have seen the incentives that the Congress has put out there to say, we want you to do this. We're going to give you a big tax credit. We have a whole bunch of grant money we're going to throw out there for you to do these projects. So people have applied in droves, and not a single permit has been issued since the ADM back in 2015, right? 14, 15, yeah. So that is a key impediment to this going on. Now, just another quick aspect of this. The states can apply to run that program in lieu of the EPA. 2 states currently have the authority to run that permitting program. One is North Dakota and the other one's Wyoming. Texas is applying, Louisiana is applying, a number of other states are gearing up to apply, but that application process has been slowed down as well. EPA has taken a really long time to review those state applications. But I can tell you, not one new permit issued by the EPA since 2015 in ADM, but with respect to the states, North Dakota has already issued 6. So we really need to get this moving. The companies who are interested in having this happen you need to call the Congress, you need to call your state, and you need to call the EPA, let them know it's a big deal.
Colin, I got to ask you, through those years, back from what Fred was talking about, and even before that, predating that, I can recall when I was at DOE, the development work that went on, I mean, that was kind of institutional research, if you will. How much internal conversation did you guys have at ADM about what are we doing with all of this? Or was there constantly this sense that there was a prize at the end of all of this?
So I think, I think you were right on in thinking that, the what are we doing? Because in the early stages of this, it was a little bit of an experiment. It was can we do it? Is it possible to do it at large scale? And so, as Jonathan mentioned, we did a large pilot between 2011 and 2013, 2014 to inject 1 million tons. That gave us the confidence then to build up from that. But to that point, when we got, even within, I'll say the last 5 years, we had conversations internally about, does this make sense to continue this? And, are there, should we continue, should we operate, should we sell it? What should we do to the site? Because at that time, it wasn't economic. I mean, we were still learning from it. We weren't injecting at the rates we're injecting. So I think as time went on, and people, and Matt brought this up about education, but even from an internal perspective, educating people on the benefits of it, and from there gaining the traction to be able to have the internal conversations about, is this something that we should utilize for the future? And that's exactly where we ended up in terms of saying that this is we've been given this golden goose. Let's take advantage of it.
I guess that's strategic foresight, so you can take full credit for that, right? Yeah, that's great. We got a few more minutes, and rather than continuing to do this, asking questions, but I don't know if there's anybody in the audience that has well, my goodness, we got a few here. So I'll ask you to go ahead and start, because I can see you. Some of the lights are difficult, but please. And just say your question. I'll repeat it here so we can catch it on, unless the microphones are available to you.
Okay, I actually have two questions. The first one relates to project economics. When you look at, ADM looks at the return on investment on this project, how much does any product premium you get from selling the decarbonized ethanol or products to customer, how essential is it to make these projects work?
And if I could, let's let the answer speak, and then perhaps we can get your follow-on question.
So that's a good question. The market will determine the value of that product. And I actually had a conversation yesterday on that exact subject and we were talking about ethanol. And the market is going to determine what the value of that product is. Now, we know that there will be some type of premium in the market for that, or the cost has to be offset by something, or nobody's going to manufacture it. And we believe that with the demand where it's at, we believe that there will be a premium that will offset the cost of that. So to that point, the market's going to determine what that particular premium is as you look at supply and demand for low carbon products.
So is that something that's needed to be built in to make the project economics profitable? Like maybe you have assumptions on where the market will be, or the project economics are profitable even excluding that? Like how critical is that for these projects to get commercial sustainability?
So does there need to be premiums in the market? Yes, there does need to be premiums in the market for it to sustain, because it's not cheap. As I said, we're coal users today, and coal is relatively cheap, so it will increase the price of the products. But again, we believe that the market is there to offset that.
But I think you also heard from Matt that the state of Illinois is imposing a future state that you can prepare for now, or you can wait to run into the wall later. And clearly, this is the strategic foresight that we were just talking about. I mean, clearly, and you know, to get a premium like that at some point, yeah, the market will determine it. But in the meantime, you know, do the first one, learn, get good at it, and then perhaps create competitive advantage. You never know, right? Yeah.
Yes. Thanks, Colin.
Yes.
This is probably a question for all of you in some respect, but starting with Colin and John, the CO2 plume management and where the plume has gone over time and the importance of getting surface rights around the area of the well. How difficult or how easy has that been in your case? And in terms of future expansion of these kind of commercial projects, the liability aspects and making that, we talked about Class 6 well permitting being a bottleneck. The other bottleneck could be obtaining surface rights to cover the 50-year plume area. And then what has Illinois done to help? I know Louisiana has passed some good rules in terms of the state taking on the liability after a period of time. Has Illinois passed anything along those lines? So a bit of a question for each of you on plume management.
So I'll start, and then Matt, I don't know if you want to jump in here on the legislation, but from an existing pore space for our injection that we've had to date, we are still, if you think about ADM's overall footprint in Decatur, we have a rather large footprint. And so we have not injected beyond what ADM's footprint is in terms of to date. So really it's around, we do have some, I say that, but there's a community college there that's working with us, and so we have the rights to pore space. But we are working with various landowners about acquiring the pore space for future injection. So it's not something that we've ignored. We're continuing to work on that.
And you didn't have to get that arranged before you started? You could wait till the plume got to their area?
You do modeling based on where you think the plume is going to go, and then you look at acquiring that. Acquiring the pore space is not a condition of submitting your Class 6 permits. Matt, do you want to talk a little bit about legislation?
Yeah, and you know, in ADM, I think out of an abundance of caution, they have been very proactive in how they are addressing the potential core space issue and getting out in front of it. And I think that's advisable, because Illinois, while there has been a lot of conversation about pore space legislation, nothing has been done yet to date. So there's no inherent prohibition per se, but there's also no protection in law or sort of guarantee for the entity choosing to inject and create the plume. So there is a desire, there have been working groups throughout this year actually in Illinois among key stakeholders and legislators that are you know, leading on this issue to try to get something done on that. And there is a hope that in the not too distant future, something can be resolved in that space. But it's a thorny issue. There's no question about it.
How does that affect you, John, in terms of, as you look out in the landscape and the interest that's out in the marketplace, the idea of whether a state is pursuing primacy or not, how far along they might be in the process of acquiring pore space? I mean, that's got to be a determining factor for you, I would imagine.
It most certainly is. Honestly, our first project is obviously co-located next to the wells. That's made it a pretty elegant solution. But as you look in other places, you know, you look to the east, Indiana is quite different. You come to the Gulf Coast, Texas and Louisiana are quite different. And it does affect the way we look at it. You know, I don't think there's a state that we think is completely out of bounds, but, you know, for it to even be in bounds, you have to have the infrastructure to support a CCUS investment, right? But in Illinois, there are, a handful of things that we're working through. We spend, Matt and I and Colin, Greg Webb at ADM spend a lot of time with lawmakers there, educating them on this. But I think we all just have to be conscious of the fact that this is the beginning of a new industry, and it's going to take time. This is a ball, and we're starting to push it. It's going to get rolling, but on the technology front, this is, we were doing pilots for natural gas and coal carbon capture, from 2017 to 2020, and those reports came out. And now we're, doing some of the first field testing for. There's been a few companies that have done some of these hard to abate sectors, but the field testing of amines and their ability to capture and how they're going to manage particulates in certain industries or steel or cement. That testing is occurring right now. So I think the reality of this being an opportunity for states is just beginning, right? That's why there's only 2 states who have primacy. And there'll be others, but this is a slow moving train, and it is an opportunity, and it's, I think as it gets moving and we show success in our project and many other projects with people who are here in the room, it's just going to continue to grow and the public will become aware. It's certainly going to take a long-term effort, right, to increase awareness and make people understand that it is a safe, reliable solution. I mean, there's been, the next panel is talking about CO2 pipelines. There's been CO2 pipelines operating in this country for decades and operated very safely, probably safer operations than, in most cases, natural gas pipelines who've had many of their issues, and there's probably only one you can point to for CO2 pipelines. But that's been the public conversation recently, and I think it's just we have to stay the course, and we have to continue to push good things forward and educate people and bring good products to the market.
Great segue to the next panel, but Fred, you had a thought you wanted to leave us with.
Well, so I don't know, this was maybe 6 or 7 years ago. It came to my attention, the particular project someone was proposing in New Jersey, right outside of New York City, to store carbon in the subsurface. And I thought, that's really interesting. You're going to go to every condo owner and get the pore space rights from every single one of them? I mean, literally, probably tens of thousands of people you'd have to talk to. That is never going to happen, okay? But it does get very complicated in some areas. Maybe the mineral rights were separated from the surface rights. Did that mineral rights separation include the pore space, or did it not? State law differs on that. Some states have tried to clarify that. North Dakota did it. Their law got struck down. The court decided, what you've done in the state law is you've actually taken ownership rights, property ownership rights away from some people. Our firm is working on these issues for a number of project developers. It can be very complicated. I'll say in some cases it's worked into a lot of law firm fees, but people generally look for property where you've got one big landowner. And in that regard, state land, federal land, you got one big owner there, right? So the Forest Service just came out a couple weeks ago with a proposal to allow the use of Forest Service land for carbon storage. That'd be a great benefit. We should encourage that sort of thing. But that's one of those key things when you're looking, where do I want to put my project? Property holding, can I find one big landowner that's got good geology? That's a great benefit.
I could stay up here another hour, but I'm not going to, because the next panel is going to be ready to go, and they've got, it's interesting how this conversation's kind of migrated right into that topic, so perfectly set up. I want to thank all our panelists, please. And yeah, it's happening, and these folks are making it happen. So again, thank you for coming.